Our video today is brought to you by the Queen's Realm. We are the Turning Point Meta. We are joined today for the Archetypes with our good friend, Adam, the Aggro King. Welcome to the show.
That's one hell of a title.
It is something to live up to entirely. Obviously, we have Nate here. Say hey.
What's up, everybody? Always back, always loving it. So last episode we went over picking your deck. We went over what colors do well, what colors maybe fall short in some areas, and we brought up the archetypes. Now, we didn't go into a lot of depth on the archetypes. A lot of the things that we went into were more just as a baseline. So the next couple episodes, what we want to do is we actually want to do more of a deep dive into what these archetypes are, what they're good at, what they're not so great at, and break them down. And so for that reason, that is why we have Adam. Adam is a good friend of ours. He plays in our play group. And I would say that, would you say that you're mainly turbo?
Yeah, and control, but mostly control, because when you play aggro like that, you need to know those windows, and so I play the opposite side so I can play aggro and turbo better.
So essentially, if knowing more archetypes is beneficial for your own.
Yes.
Okay.
It lets you know your windows, so yeah.
Okay, easy enough. All right, well, so the first thing that I'd like to just kind of go over is, because obviously we know who you are and what you play. I was curious as to just starting from the beginning, how long have you played Magic? What was your first introduction? What got you into EDH as a whole? And then what turned you to a CEDH player?
All right, so first interaction with Magic was probably, I think, 6th grade during lunch, when some dude rolled up with a bunch of cards and was like, let's play this game, and I'm pretty sure we played it wrong. And then that was I don't even know what set that would have been. It was a long time ago. Then when I actually started actively getting my own cards, playing the game, would have been, I think, Champions of Kamigawa was the first time I really played, and I built this absolutely trash Battle of the Wits deck that was trying to get to Battle of the Wits before I didn't have 200 cards in my library.
Okay.
And so that's where I started, and then from there went to playing Standard in New Phyrexia, and just, I guess, mostly Standard for a while after that, until Commander started becoming a thing, and then I built a semi-competitive Vish Call deck back when he was kind of a menace to Commander.
Okay.
And then I stopped playing because I went to college and couldn't afford the game.
Sure.
And then you guys know the rest, because I showed up at the store we were playing at, and with that Rowan deck, started playing. And that's where I started playing CDH, really.
That's really nice. What motivates you to keep going and playing competitive EDH?
Honestly, I'm a computer scientist, and the stack actually is a big thing for me, because that's how computers operate. And so actually seeing that resolve in that order and being able to solve it as a puzzle is really, really interesting to me. And that doesn't happen in your normal casual games usually.
Interesting. And you deal a lot with the stacking in aggro, where you might not be taking many turns.
Yes, all the time, because you have to defend yourself. You have to know where to win on top of the stack, be able to tell, for example, resolving an ad nauseum on top of somebody else's win attempt to try and then get Born Upon the Wind to win on top of them is something I have done before.
So knowing your windows is incredibly important for an aggressive aggro king like yourself.
Yes, knowing when every other player has essentially exhausted their ability to deal with you, or has left themselves vulnerable, is absolutely critical to the gameplay.
Awesome. What was your first detrimental learning experience in Magic?
My first or most impactful?
we'll say most impactful that you remember that something just happened, and from then on, you just said, "Cool, this is going to affect the rest of my career in Magic."
So that was actually recently at what tournament was it? I'm trying to remember. It was the last tournament that we went to.
Was that Salt City 2?
Yeah, it was Salt City.
Salt City 2.
So
Okay.
Salt City 2, I was playing Rowan, trying to get that to work. I think that without blue, it's hard or even faster pieces. But I was second seat, and first seat accidentally revealed that they had an Academy Erector, and they already had Goblin Bombardment on the field, so they were going to get that the not birthing pod line, the Protean Hulk line pretty easily.
Okay.
And so I had Beseech the Queen in my hand and a Treasonous Ogre on field. And I was so focused on how can I get Vandal Blast to blow out all of his mana sources that I forgot that I had Sensei's Divining topped 2 turns earlier, and Vandal Blast was on the top of my library. And so I was so focused on it that I was like, I can't do this without paying all my life into the Beseech the Queen and just dying, that I forgot it was there. And past turn, and immediately was like, wait, can I take that back? And they were like, no, obviously, because competitive scene. And I just looked at the other 2 players, and I'm like, I'm so sorry, guys. I'm pretty sure Vandal Blast is in the top 3 somewhere. And it was very much there.
So I do want to take a quick detour because I know that we started out the episode, and we obviously do want to talk about Turbo. But I guess what I want to ask you as kind of a Turbo player is, how do you, as a Turbo player, define Turbo?
Perfect.
What is the best way that you can describe to someone who has absolutely no idea what Turbo is? How do, like, this is what it is, and this is how it functions.
Okay, so I'm going to go into this assuming that they have a little bit of game knowledge. If not, feel free to, watch these guys' podcast. I'm sure they'll cover a lot more.
Well, okay, with that, just a real quick question. Would you recommend Turbo as a starting deck for people?
Ooh.
If they have no experience with Magic the Gathering as a whole, probably not. As CDH, I think it's okay. If like you're just coming from another format and you want to play, just because feel free to. You're going to run into a lot of pitfalls, a lot of traps. You're gonna learn, and that's completely okay. If you're okay with making mistakes, and I still do to this day,
As do we all.
Sure.
then for sure. But Turbo is already running on very thin mana margins, very thin. You're taking the narrowest opportunity and investing all of your resources into that window to try and win as quickly as possible. That's how I would define Turbo.
I gotcha.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, no, that was perfect. That's a great way to kind of just encompass what Turbo is. So it's wanting to win as fast as you possibly can, but if something comes out and something slows you down or it stops you, it's about taking a window as fast as you possibly can as well. Would you say that's fair?
Absolutely, because let's say you get stopped in the early turns when you try to go off, you also have to be able to then realize at a later time, this is the one piece that's stopping me. If I can get rid of that, I have my window.
Okay,
Okay.
gotcha, understood.
So, what's your main deck and what's your pet deck that you really enjoy playing as well?
So currently my main deck is Rograk Silas. I'm really enjoying it, and my pet deck is probably Rowan Scion of War. I really like the mechanic of literally just blowing through your life total and getting rewarded for it.
Cool. You want to go a little bit into those just for a couple minutes?
Yeah, for sure. So pet deck first, Rowan Scion of War is all about literally just investing your entire life total into like one turn. Generally, you're investing roughly 4 for the win, but you can go a lot more to resolve really powerful spells like Peer into the Abyss, Torment of Hellfire, things like that, and just end the game. Rogsai, on the other hand, has the ability to go a little bit more into the late game, where Rowan struggles is once she's been stopped. It's kind of hard to get back in unless you have that window just presented to you, which doesn't happen very often. A lot of people don't just remove the things on your turn for you, because she does have to operate at sorcery speed compared to Silas and Rograk, where you can
have the blue,
have that blue
be able
to
to protect
just
yourself a little bit better. Yes, we talked about that last week in general, what blue really does, and we were talking about the different color pairs where black and red just go pretty quick.
They're explosive.
They're very explosive. But then the blue is also a way to protect yourself entirely. And then the ultimate white for the silence is even that much more if need be.
I hate that card.
Green, yeah. Green is so bad. Love it to death. Print some more cards, Watsy. Thank you.
Yeah, please. That would be absolutely fantastic. Yeah. So I do want to stop for just a second, because I'm sure Chris has probably put Rograk and Silas up on the screen at some point.
Yep.
So I'm sure that a lot of people coming from casual to competitive, they will see Rograk at the helm of some decks. And to a lot of people, when you're coming into this format, you don't understand why Rograk is there.
Yeah.
When people think, I want to go fast, I want to do things that are very powerful, they see something like Rograk, who is just, I believe he has Vigilance, Menace, and...
First Strike, Menace, Trample, 0/1 for 0.
Okay. So,
partner,
I was going to say.
I don't know. Those words don't really matter when you're playing the game.
It's a 0/1 that doesn't matter if it has First Strike.
But so, if you could for just a second, could you explain to people what it is about... Because... For the most part, Silas, would you say Silas is mainly just there for color?
For the most part, every now and then when the stars align and the moon is beautiful, you can return a Lotus Petal to do something, or
Death Touch?
He does have Death Touch, so he is a good blocker in the late game because people are going to pressure your life total. And then there are a couple new combos with like Grinding Station and Sithonian Nightmare that you can do. Okay. So he does have some win lines, but they're more of like a plain E win line.
Gotcha. Okay. So then... For people out there, obviously we understand that, but we want people to understand why Rograk, of all the red partner commanders, why is he so good in a turbo shell? Because for those that don't know, Rogsai in our format is kind of the definitive turbo deck. It shows up in a lot of tournaments. It top 16s constantly. It's been winning recently as well.
A lot.
Yeah, I think it's in the 25% conversion rate, something like that. I'm sure which is up on the screen.
Yeah, which is good, which is great. But obviously for newer players, I want them to understand why Rograk.
Yeah, for sure. So Rograk, I mean, obviously anything for 0 mana is huge because you can just play it. Like, doesn't matter the circumstances. And then you have to remember, in our format, the free commander spells are very, very impactful. Like having a free counter spell, having a free change of target, having a free exile effect, just because you have your commander on your board that you didn't even pay for, is absolutely insane. It gives you 3 cards that you're running in your deck that you can just cast for free, unconditionally, pretty much.
Sure.
And so, I mean, what is that? That's 3 mana from Deflecting Swat, 4 from Deadly Rollick, and 3 for Fierce Guardianship, I think. So almost 10 mana that you're getting for free.
Yep. Flare of Duplication.
And then Flare of Duplication is also another one that you can just sack Rograk. And that's honestly what he's there for, is either to be sacked or turn on free spells. And those... spells like Culling Ritual.
Yes.
I always get those two mixed up.
Yes.
Culling Ritual, and like Infernal Plunge, all of those that you can just sack Rograk for explosive amounts of mana to resolve that ad nauseum or things
Culling
like
the
that.
Weak. That's the one where you sack and you get 4 black mana for it.
Culling the Weak.
A Culling Ritual is a different card. Also a very powerful card you will see in the format.
It always messes me up.
It's okay.
I always have to look at it. One's green, black, one's black.
So he's there mainly as an activation for these other cards.
Yes, he turns all those abilities on, and then he also gives you a lot of explosive mana to be able to resolve your powerful spells.
Okay.
What are you really trying to cheat on in general? I mean, are you trying to draw a bunch of cards all of a sudden? Are you trying to cheat on mana? I mean, what different avenues are you really trying to get ahead of everyone else?
It kind of depends on what turbo deck you're playing, but like in Rogsai, in Rowan, you're getting so much mana and card advantage that even if they try to stop you, it doesn't matter. Like
Okay.
you have near infinite amounts of mana, a card quality in your hand that is just near impossible to deal with. It's not impossible. Earlier we talked about the card Silence. I hate that card. It's horrible.
It's so good.
Get rid of it. That card can absolutely ruin a turbo player's day. If you're playing into turbo and you're in white, run that card.
Absolutely.
100%.
That's the only reason why sometimes you run white.
Oh yeah.
It's so good.
Okay.
Yeah, go for it.
So in your opinion, where do you feel like in this current time when we're recording this and at the time it goes up,
Yeah.
where do you feel like this archetype is sitting in the meta? Do you think it is a heads and above everything else, or is it kind of in this middle ground? Where do you feel like it sits?
So I haven't been playing CDH for a long time, but I have looked at, like, I've watched other videos, stuff like that. And so it seems, to me, correct me if I'm wrong, but it almost seems like it's a power balance between the turbo and mid-range cycle. The more mid-range decks go, the more powerful turbo gets, because the longer your game plan is, the earlier wins are harder to deal with. And then vice versa, the more turbo people go, mid-range slots in things that can slow them down and then grind the game out. And so it's kind of like a yin-yang power balance of one gets stronger, one gets weaker, in my opinion. But I would say it's very powerful for the decks that have been kind of mathematically solved, like Rograk Silas, and to a degree, like Crick is very, very strong. I know you've played Crick.
Yeah.
Anola is pretty strong.
Yeah, Anola as well.
It's a great turbo deck. Very complex, but good.
Yeah.
And I think as we go into the future, and there's some of those cards, like Rowan was a card that very much gave a unique twist to turbo. And so if we get more support like that, I could see it getting very, very strong.
Okay. Awesome. Love that. Chris, do you want to take the next one just to make sure that I don't miss anything, and if there's anything else that's coming to mind as far as maybe some newer people would like to know about what turbo is or what it can do, or
Sure.
how to
So,
kind of play?
I have a great question for you then. So when you sit down with aggro, just general, not necessarily your deck or main deck or pet deck, what are the decks that you want to sit across from? And what are the decks you don't want to sit across from? What's your ideal pod and your non-ideal pod if you were an aggro player?
Depending on seat order, kind of as well. Because if you're in first seat as turbo, you're like, I don't care what's
We'll just say
over there.
We'll just say second or third.
Second or
third.
Second or third. All right. So I would probably say the biggest threat currently, at least obviously in our meta here, would be Magda, because it's just like, cool, I get 4 treasures and I play a dampening sphere and all the turbo players cry.
We have a lot of answers. The
Yeah.
dwarves have a lot of answers. We've been mining for a long time, and finally we've got some good cards.
In general, I would also say Blue Farm it's one of those ones that you have to be very careful with at the table, because they have the ability to kind of match your pace by slowing you down and then doing the exact same thing you were trying to do.
Yeah.
Those would be 2 that I would look out for. And then other decks that kind of you want to see are generally like stacks decks, surprisingly, unless they're played correctly. Like at tournaments, a lot of people play stacks to slow everyone down, not cement their advantage ahead.
Sure. So like Drannith Magistrate.
Yeah.
Do you really care about that? Does it hurt you that much?
It's not horrible. Like, obviously, if you're in like turn 1, it's kind of puts you in a bad spot because you can't get Rograk out, turn on all those free spells, and get that mana boost. But generally, you're casting Rograk before then, most of the time.
Sure.
You're getting Rograk out before Drannith Magistrate. because he's 0 cost. So he just cool. I'm gonna play him turn 1.
So stacks you want to play into if the person isn't good. How would you?
Well, I wouldn't say good, but if they're not focused on cementing their lead,
Okay.
if that makes sense. If they're trying to grind the game out instead of, I guess, not really turboing themselves, but like gaining that like turn 1 advantage, like dropping rocks, dropping all of their stuff, and then saying, cool, nobody else gets to do anything.
How would your archetype do against something such as Kinnan, where it's not necessarily a stacks deck, but it does have a lot of stacks pieces in general?
It's one of those ones that you do have to navigate around. For example, when I was on Rowan a lot, Kinnan, I think it's Perplexing Chimera. That card makes it really hard to work around.
Some people don't play it. It is a very difficult card to navigate, and me and Nate definitely are on Kinnan every so often.
Yes.
And he's off the Perplexing Chimera. I'm on it, and it's a really interesting thing because you do cast a lot of spells in general.
Absolutely.
And that's kind of where you want that. I don't want to get your... I mean, I would love to get a dockside, but I don't want necessarily a stacks piece off of someone that then I swap back to them eventually with the land that returns everything. Homeward Path.
Homeward Path.
Yeah,
Homeward Path.
correct.
Put that up.
Correct.
And then also, just as a clarification, I know that the Kinnan is often, and this is an episode that actually we can do another time as well, going over the actual the decks that are usually recommended as new player decks. And I know that there is a list going around that for new players they play Perplexing Chimera in it. I think if you're a new player, I would avoid that card.
Clones.
Just put in another clone or something for now, and then obviously as you learn, put it back in if that's what you like. I'm an experienced player, and I'm still not really big on it, but beside the point.
But
Move on from that.
Okay, so you said stacks. That's something that you want to see. Is there anything else, like a particular deck that you are like, when you see this deck, I mean, obviously you probably don't want to be against blue decks in general.
yeah, those definitely put a hamper on things, because obviously if you're into a pot of 3 other blue players that happen to just have the nuts and be able to counter whatever you're trying to do really early game just because they have 2 blue cards in their hand, it's really rough. Those Force of Wills, Force of Negations will absolutely ruin your day, because even if you try to, like, let's say you get the absolute crazy hand, you get that ad nauseum turn 1, and you just 2 people have to happen to have a Force of Negation or a Force of Will, and you're probably cooked.
Okay. Yeah. So non-blue decks is really what you want to sit across from.
Yes, in the most part. And then for the stacks, like Archetype that we were talking about, cards in them can be like if you get later in the game, they get to get those stacks pieces out. Things like Dampening Sphere, Perplexing Chimera, to a degree Torpor Orb, because it stops your like Dockside, and your Thassa's Oracle wins. So
One of the newest pieces that's really done a lot of work for me in general is Vexing Bauble. How do you feel about that in general?
Vexing Bauble is an extremely annoying card. It's very good. It's one of those cards that has to be put in the right deck, though, because like I actually tried running it in Rogside because I was like, oh, this actually isn't too bad. But then I was like, wait a second, this sucks. I can't cast my commander. I can't cast my rocks. I can't do my Breach Loop. So it's one of those pieces that I think is really, really good at stopping those people who are trying to go just send it and go fast.
Sure.
And where you can just get rid of it on your turn to do your own thing is extremely powerful. And I that's one of those I would put that in there as well, like along with Dampening Sphere, things like that, because it is extremely, you have to work around anything that you have to generally work around. Is a good stacks piece.
Gotcha.
Because like it forces me to go get Chain of Vapor or a Cyclonic Rift or something to deal with it.
A reactive card opposed to being proactive, and that's I definitely see Vexing Bauble not necessarily being phenomenal in your deck because you're using up mana to crack it. At times you want to be proactive, make people, you're the knocking on people's doors saying, do you have it, opposed to stopping people necessarily unless you your deck can kind of pivot towards that, and that's why I think you picked Roxai over your pet deck, Rowan, is you have that blue, you have that long game, like you were saying before. That's, perfect. Yeah.
Speaking of blue, a huge card that I think both hinders any of those turbo decks and actually helps it. It's both a reactive and proactive piece. We were kind of talking about before the podcast is the Polywag Prodigy.
Okay.
I think that if you are in a turbo meta where people are trying to do breach loops and things like that, if you're in blue, I think it's insane because every time they cast that LED in that loop, you draw a card.
Interesting.
And there's no, I'm going to pay for it. It's just you draw the card. It's really, really good in those turbo shells too, because like let's say you're going against somebody else who's stopped you and they try to do that breach loop, or they try to drop all their rocks, or they try to do something, it can kind of recover you really, really well.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Shout out to a new card. I love it.
Okay.
So obviously, for the most part, everyone knows what turbo means. It means to go fast. What is your ideal turn? What turn are you shooting for most of the time, right? Because I think a lot of people that are coming into this meta, when they into CEDH in general, they have a tendency to think that turbo means you are looking for the turn 1 win in every single one of your opening hands. Would you say that's true, or what do you think on that?
You are definitely looking for it.
Okay.
You are looking for it. You're not going to see it very often.
Okay.
It is definitely something like a lot of turbo decks do have turn 1 wins. Like they have 1 or 2 that they can get to it. But generally your probably turn that you're aiming for is probably turn 3. Turn 2, like turn 1, you're setting up all your mana, everything that can help you win a fight in trying to resolve a spell, anything like that. So like your Mystic Remora, well, I guess usually not Mystic Remora, but like Rhystic Study is usually a pretty good one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because you're going to be sacking the fish, sadly.
Right, of course.
Because you can't pay for it. But stuff like that, resolving spells to kind of set up for those turns, those really big power turns. So maybe turn 2, if you're lucky and just draw the right cards, and turn 3 is probably generally where most of your windows are going to be.
Okay.
Past that, it's kind of just waiting. Maybe not waiting, but watching is probably a better term, because you do have to be watching the board state. Like if somebody bounces a stacks piece on their turn that was stopping you, if you can go at instant speed and win, that's your window. It's mostly just when that window is, and sometimes that window is turn 1.
Okay.
So I wouldn't say there's really a specific turn, but it's more when that window is, and I would guess that turn 3 is probably where that's usually going to happen.
Okay, perfect. So, in your general opinion, why do you feel like someone would be attracted to turbo? And also, on the flip side of that, why do you think someone would look at turbo and be like, maybe that's not the archetype for me? Maybe that's not what I want to do. What do you feel are the pros and cons of something like turbo?
To a degree, it's turbo is gambling. Like
Get your scratch off.
Yeah, obviously it's more than that. There is a lot of strategy, but it does come down to a lot of luck, and a lot of how bad your opponent's luck was as well.
Okay.
So getting those really fast wins and just breaking through, it's a dopamine rush. You get that, yes, let's go, we did it.
Okay.
So that if you like playing risky, because it is very risky, because if you get stopped, you're generally going to be playing a much longer game. Obviously, there are ways to come back. I'm not saying that in turbo, if you get blown out, you're just like, well, I might as well fold. That definitely not the case. There is always a way to come back. It's just a lot harder.
Okay.
Because once you get stopped, you have to rebuild a lot more than I think a lot of other decks, because your most turbo decks that I've seen anyway operate on like sorceries, instants, things that are kind of harder to get back.
Ooh, that's really interesting. So with the meta being very mid-range heavy, do you think that's one reason why turbo is able to kind of fit into that slot because it's not too worried it has time to rebuild?
Yeah, like it's not permanent based for the most part. So I mean, every turn when you draw a card, you have a potential to just, oh, this is the thing that I needed to come back and just go for it.
Interesting.
Okay, cool. So when you were first, let's say when you were first getting into CEDH, or maybe when you were first like getting into Magic in general, because we're kind of going to go back here for a second, but like, what advice would you have given yourself when looking into something like this, or like looking into these kinds of archetypes? Like, what would you wish you would have known before you picked up Turbo, if anything comes to mind?
So before I picked up Turbo, I would probably say the biggest one is going for proactive pieces that are also reactive pieces. Some examples would be like Opposition Agent. Opposition Agent, if somebody goes for a tutor to go grab a card, you are both being reactive and proactive. You resolve an Opposition Agent, you go get the card you needed to win.
Putting someone behind and
you're
get yourself a forward.
And also, if you do get stopped, it stops everyone else still until they remove that piece.
Nice.
And then we kind of mentioned it earlier, that Polywog Prodigy kind of does that same thing. It is both proactive and reactive in drawing you cards and being able to get you your win, as well as maybe convincing somebody not to go for it because you're going to feed me. You're going to feed me so many cards if you do this. So I think I kind of avoided a lot of those reactive cards when I was first like building Rowan. I didn't run Opposition Agent. It was just all, I'm going to go straight gas and try to win, which, don't get me wrong, it works. It's just a different approach. And so I think, and there aren't a ton of cards that do it currently in the meta,
Sure.
but things like Opposition Agent, I think, are good includes because it does give you flexibility, if that makes sense.
I gotcha. It's really interesting. Let's talk about the viability of aggro in general for newer players. So my thought process in general is, so we have mid-range and we have aggro, or we have control in aggro in general. We'll just stick to those because Stacks is its own level of hell.
Which will absolutely be its own episode. So stay tuned for that. We will absolutely talk about Stacks because it needs to be discussed.
Absolutely. It's a difficult one. So really, my train of thought is for a mid-range or a control deck in general for a newer player is you have to make more decisions. If I make 30 decisions in a game and I make 5 mistakes, that's not too bad. But if everyone else is playing 30, different interactions or different choices in the game and they make 0, then who's really disadvantaged? So you have to play a little bit tighter in general for control and for mid-range in general. Whereas control, you're making 5 choices. We'll just say, right, 5 choices. It is detrimental if you make 1 mistake in those 5 because that's 1/5 of your decisions that you've made in general. But from my point of view, in general, aggro seems good for a new player because they make 5 decisions. I don't need to think about 30 different cards necessarily. I mean, it is difficult, but your choices are less, and therefore you can take more time thinking about those in general, opposed to a newer player making 5 mistakes in 30 plays, which is completely reasonable, but it could be detrimental to their game plan. That's my thought process. Please pick it apart and tell me why I'm wrong or why you might agree with that.
Okay, so I do agree with it. There are a couple of things that I'd like to point out. In a one-on-one format, you are absolutely correct.
Okay.
Where you do have 3 other opponents, those 5 decisions that, like, if you're playing into 3 other control players, that's 15 decisions they make that can't be taken advantage of. If you're making 5 wrong decisions in one turn, you have 3 people that have the option to shut you down. So you do have to be very careful. But like you said, it's more streamlined. You don't. You generally, once you're going for your win, you know exactly what you're going to do because hopefully you've goldfished your deck and know your combo. But if not, I highly recommend doing that. Playing through your combo.
Interesting.
Absolutely.
That's quite interesting. So knowing everyone else's deck doesn't necessarily come as much for a control deck where you need to know when to interact or stacks what pieces to play. In aggro, you have your game plan, and for the most part, you just do your game plan most of the time.
Most of the time, you do need to know other people's decks still, because, like, for example, if you know somebody, like, for example, when you're on Magda and you're activating a Magda activation, generally I know that's going to be, oh, hey, that's probably going to be a dampening sphere or something that's going to make it so
God statue.
Yeah, that one.
Good lord. Yeah.
Also another
God Pharaoh statue.
in decks that can get the God Pharaoh stacks you out, like Magda, absolutely disgusting card. Most other decks that have trouble getting, what is it, 9 mana? You never pay for it, so you probably don't know.
I think it's 6, and Portal to Phyrexia, I believe, is 9. We'll put them up on there, and I could be horribly wrong. I don't know all my cards. I don't know them.
You're not paying for the mana cost anyway, right?
5 treasures. I don't care what the mana cost is. Let's go.
All right, but like knowing that you're activating Magda and knowing that that's going to be a piece that stops me is very critical. So knowing other people's ways to stop you is very important for aggro in a multiplayer format, because if there's 3 people that have ways, you have to know A, how much those pieces affect you, and B, how much those pieces affect everyone else. Because if Nate's over here on a deck that really, really hates whatever you're trying to resolve, maybe he'll get rid of it for me.
I gotcha. So I don't want to put words in your mouth. I'm thinking off the cuff in general. So it's a low floor, high ceiling. If you do know, if you do know everyone's deck, then you're able to get better at the deck. So there's a lot of improvements that you can do. But once again, if you start with simple pieces and execute your plan, then it is easier-ish to get into. For you, I know that you started Rockside the last month or two in general, and talk about like the expertise requirements for your deck specifically.
For Rockside, honestly, the hardest part of playing that deck is your opening hand. Knowing where those cards are going to fit 2 turns in the future, or this turn or next turn, depending on the hand, obviously, but generally being able to piece together not only a win condition, but some sort of backup for that win condition in that opening hand of 7 cards, possibly even down to 3 if you're really feeling lucky that day.
So it mulligans well.
Yes, it does mulligan very well. You can get some, if you mulligan down to 3 and you get a blue land and a mana crypt and a Rhystic Study, keep it. That's
interesting.
Well, maybe not if you're in 4th seat, but
sure. I mean, you definitely said that it was a gambling, if you will, kind of deck. Like if you like the rush in general, would you say most aggro decks or turbo decks do well on mulligans?
Probably. I've only played 2, so between the 2 I've played, yes. Rowan was also get Rowan out, and as long as you can't get Rowan out and you have 1 absurdly powerful spell you can resolve, it's probably worth the keep. Rogsai is also similar. He's they're less on the super powerful spells for nearly free, and more just going for those combo turns. So I would say that card quality in your turbo decks are usually very, very high, and you're running on razor thin mana anyway. So as long as you can get the things you're trying to do, then
interesting.
You're good to go.
So razor thin mana. How many lands does Turbo normally run in comparison to the other archetypes?
On Rogue's I think I'm at 23.
23. Mid-range is about 27,
27, 28 is typically what I've seen. There are some mid-range decks that dip a little bit higher. Recently, Nadu was printed. Nadu runs about 30, 31.
Interesting.
But there is a massive difference between a Turbo's mana base, because you don't want to hit your lands. You don't really care enough to hit your lands.
There is one exception. There's a card called Vargoth that you can put up on the screen. That one runs, I think, 32 lands, but that's because it's literally I'm going to ad nauseum and put everything in my library into my hand. So it's a different approach.
Okay, so there are also different discrepancies between
Yeah,
turbo decks as to which ones run a lot of lands, but I would say typically turbo lists don't want to see a ton of lands.
Yeah.
They
Same
want
with,
to see their rocks and other ways of explosive mana.
Yeah. Another new one that kind of operates the exact opposite and even goes a little bit lower if you're building a turbo is Flubs the Fool.
Okay. I have seen some Flubs lists.
I saw a video on that, something about like an 82% win rate. I'm like, I have no idea. Once again, saw it on YouTube. Clickbait worked on me, I guess. I didn't click on the video, but it does seem like a very interesting deck. I know that your brother, old Two Swans, runs that. Do you want to talk about that deck for a little second?
Yeah, so that's actually in my opinion, it's a really interesting approach to turbo. I built a slightly different list than he's running. He's going for the the whole Cheerios approach or eggs. That means 0 mana cost for anybody who's new. And essentially you just play a whole bunch of 0 cost things, draw your whole library, and then win off like Laboratory Maniac. My approach was a little bit different. I went for the loops with Food Chain, Mist Hologriffin, and Squee. So once you're looping those things and you have no cards in hand, you can just draw your entire library, go get the Breach combo, and just win from there.
How viable do you think that's going to be in the meta in general, if you had to guess?
I think it's one of those decks, kind of like Winota, that once people figure it out, it'll be less good. Sure. Just because, like, if you remove Flubs, like, their whole game plan is over usually. Like, because it's very commander centric, operates on playing multiple cards. Another case where Silence absolutely makes them cry. Same with Dampening Sphere. So it depends on how often those cards show up, and how people adapt to that type of approach compared to your regular turbo lists, which aren't actually resolving. Like they're generally not storming out like Flubs does and playing possibly 50 cards in a turn. They're usually looping the same card over and over.
Interesting. Yeah. Storm. Man, I absolutely love Storm. I know that there was a deck I was looking at was the new Ral deck in general.
The Planeswalker one?
The Planeswalker one.
That one. Ultimate is insane.
That one's quite interesting. I saw it on a podcast. Someone was brewing it up in general, and it looked really interesting. And that's a different version of Turbo in general. Is spell slinging. I mean, I guess yours is definitely heavy on spells as well, but just almost exclusively reducing the cost of them, somewhat similar to Rowan, but interesting, very interesting.
I've actually been considering testing out the Ral in Roxai because, giving Dark Ritual Storm is insane.
Interesting thought. I like that.
Like, I trying to find is it actually worth it? Like,
is it
where
proactive?
Where does it actually fit in? I mean, it does also create I think it's a 1/1 Otter with Prowess that is essentially just another Rograk to sacrifice for mana. So it's not horrible.
Okay.
But I can't even remember what his middle ability is. But
I think we're talking about different Rals.
Wait, the Planeswalker?
The Planeswalker one can't be. I mean, when you flip it, it's the flip one, right?
Oh, I thought you were talking about the Otter.
They'll both be up on the screen. And you'll be just as
Okay.
confused as they are.
One can be a commander because it's a legendary creature. The other one is a Planeswalker.
Oh, okay. I'm so confused.
I mean, unless we're going back to that time when Planeswalkers can be commanders again.
Both cool, both viable, both will be up on the screen.
Also, if you're
Awesome.
interested in that, go check out Oathbreaker. It's a cool format.
Interesting. Love it. Any hot takes? Any hot takes about EDH as a whole, a specific card that you absolutely can't stand and don't know why it's in the meta as a whole, and you just every time this is played, I hate it. Besides Silence, we
covered the
That's
silence.
not a hot take. That's a fact.
ban Silence. Okay,
Don't ban it. It does have its place,
restrict
but
it to one.
Maybe take the players to play it out into the parking lot and show them what's up.
Okay.
Just kidding.
Aggro players unite.
Yeah. I do not actually advocate for any actual aggression. Yeah, no, I would say one, probably my hottest take is that I think that Thoracle should be banned. As somebody who literally plays it in my deck, it is such a format warping card that there are people that are in black running Praetor's Grasp, running Demonic Consultation and Tainted Pact just because they can go steal somebody else's Thoracle even though they don't have blue. And not only that, it's super it's hard to interact with.
Yeah.
It's an annoying card in general because even if you kill it, that lets them reanimate it. It's really a problem card. Yeah. And I don't, maybe not a permanent ban, but I would like to see it banned for an amount of time just to see how the format changes, see if there is any new strategies that come out that are as efficient or maybe even a little bit less efficient, because you can, in most turbo decks, your dream hand is being able to resolve the Thassa's Oracle combo turn 1.
I definitely think it would diversify your different win cons in general, just because blue and black are just so powerful, and why wouldn't you A plus B in general? Yeah, that's an interesting take, and I kind of agree with it.
Yeah, no, I do definitely understand. And a quick rules break with Thassa's Oracles, I actually did have to explain this to someone who was a bit more casual recently, was they thought to themselves that if you were to kill a Thassa's Oracle before its quote-unquote resolution, that you can actually stop the win, and that's actually not the case. If they do not have a library, 0 is still equal to 0 if they have no devotion to blue, therefore they still win the game. So just as a...
Devotion is how many pips you have.
Is how many pips you have,
pips.
Permanent-based pips you have on the board.
In the case of Thassa's Oracle, it'd be blue pips specifically.
Yes,
correct. So, again, 0 is still equal to 0. If they have no cards in their library, they still win the game, even if you remove the Thassa's Oracle, which is why it is difficult to interact with.
So when are we going back to Theros?
I don't know, but hopefully it's just...
Let's see. We got Breach. We got Thoracle. Any other format warping cards?
I don't know, but I don't want to think about it.
Cool.
So anyway, all right. I think that about wraps it up for the episode of Turbo. Please, if you guys have any questions in the comments, we'll be watching the video. We'll be more than happy to answer other questions about Turbo in general, where it sits, maybe other Turbo decks that we've played before. And we'd love to answer any more questions you guys have. I believe next week is going to be our control.
Yes.
Our control topic. And then after control, I believe we'll either talk about mid-ranger stacks. We're not 100% sure which one of those will be next. And then from there, we'll have more and more topics. Might do a staples list. That actually came up the other day that I need to discuss with you about.
Awesome.
But yeah, I think that'll do it. Thanks again for watching. This was the Turning Point Meta Podcast, and we will see you all next week. Appreciate you.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being here.
I'm going dumb. I'm trying to live it and stunt. Get anything that I want whenever I want. It's okay to be broke. It's not okay to be a bum. Gotta move up. I never front. I keep it 100, do it for fun, man.